Okay, welcome back to ZOO3649, Evolutionary Genetics. We are at lecture 34 out of 40. We're in the final part of our module. We have two lectures to go in the speciation section and then another 5 lectures to go in the molecular ecology section. So, in the last lecture, I started talking to you about the modern view of speciation. And that modern view of speciation, we dealt with what we call adaptive integration. So, integration meaning gene flow, and adaptive meaning having a selective advantage. Okay, where the gene flow itself confers a selective advantage to the hybrid, and so leads to hybrid speciation. Okay, so already the modern view is dismantling the classical view. And remember, the classical view said there is no role for gene flow in speciation. The modern view saying, there is. In fact, you can even get new species because of gene flow between species. Okay, so that's the modern view. And so we're continuing this now, this idea with adaptive radiations. Now, what is an adaptive radiation? You know what an adaptive radiation is. We've studied it in biology before. You've heard the term in first year, you heard the term in second year. An adaptive radiation is the evolution of lots of different phenotypes, rapid evolution of lots of different species, phenotypes, within a short space of time from a single common ancestor. Okay, so it's divergent evolution. It's from a common ancestor. Many species diverge rapidly, and one of the classical case of an adaptive radiation is that of these animals you see here. So, on first glance, these animals look quite different, right? Many of them are found in Africa. Here's the nyala, here's a sable, here's a duiker, cow, sheep, a kind of goat. So, what are these animals? They're a certain kind of animal. They're called bovids, B-O-V-I-D. Okay, a bovid. And all of these animals shared a common ancestor in the last, say, 15 to 20 million years, which means that all these species, and you know, bovids are not just these 6, there are over 200 different species of bovid, okay? And all of them evolved very quickly within that short space of time, okay? So now, and so this is, and just for your information, most of our most important domestic animals, okay, cows, sheep, and goats, come from this adaptive radiation. Okay, so it means a lot to us. If this adaptive radiation had never occurred, our civilization could not have occurred. We could not have developed and domesticated all these animals. Okay, and we would not have become civilized. Okay, so this adaptive radiation of the bovids really has influenced our own civilization and evolution. Okay, because these were mainly our prey items when we were hunter-gatherers, and then they became our domestic animals. Okay, so the adaptive radiations is a rapid evolution of many distinct species. Okay, and this might be due to sudden climate changes, like, for example, glacial periods of the Pleistocene. We know during the Pleistocene the climate changed. It became very cold during an ice age, and then it became very warm, and then it became very cold again and became very warm. Now, what happens during those periods when it becomes very cold? What happened to the grasslands? The grasslands became widespread because when it became cold, the climate became cold, it also became dry, and grasslands spread. Then, during an interglacial cycle, so not an ice age, the opposite of an ice age, the climate becomes wet again. And when it becomes wet, what happens? The grasslands shrink, and all the species that were living on the grasslands become isolated. And what happens when you get isolation and no gene flow? You get genetic drift. Okay? And so very quickly, you can have this isolation and in pockets, and very quickly genetic drift can lead to lots of different kinds of species. Okay, so you have this isolation, and then what happens? The grassland species become isolated when it becomes warmer, because when it becomes warmer, it becomes also wetter. So what? The grasslands retract, and the forests, the rainforests, start to get bigger. So then what happens to the species that are living in the forests? They start to expand, right? And when there's another ice age, and the grasslands become more again, and the forests go down, what happens? The forests become isolated from each other, and then genetic drift and selection can evolve different forms into those isolated patches. Remember, if you're isolated, there's no gene flow. It's quickly to evolve differences. Okay, and so that is how adaptive radiations work. Okay, they are driven by changes in climatic cycle, changes in the temperature, changes in the uplift of the earth, changes the continents moving. So a lot of things have created adaptive radiations, the rapid evolution of many closely related species. And one species, and I gave you this example in the last lecture, but I want to give it to you in a little bit more example, a little bit more detail this time, is the hybridization that occurs during adaptive radiations. So, because the adaptive radiation is very rapid, the rapid evolution of different species, what happens to reproductive isolation? It doesn't develop fully. Okay, so you can get the phenotype or the species looking differently very quickly, but they are still able to, the different looking species or phenotypes can still mate with each other. Because why? Adaptive radiation, the reproductive isolation takes much longer to develop. You have to build up these unshared genes, right? You have to build up these incompatibilities, and that takes a long time, right? But when you have evolution during an adaptive radiation, you actually can get the phenotype evolving very quickly, but the reproductive isolation still takes a long time. So what happens then? You can get many different species, but what? They're all able to breed with each other because they don't have reproductive isolation, because reproductive isolation takes long. All right? So a classic case is this Pachyptilla radiation, or the prion radiation. Pachyptilla is the genus name for the prions. And I gave you this example last time of this hybrid species that myself and colleagues discovered in South Africa. And there's this Antarctic prion. You see, it has a very narrow bill. This beak here is very narrow. Okay, and I'm talking about the width of the beak, not the length of the beak. The width of the beak is very narrow. Okay, and because it has a narrow beak, it can eat certain species of fish. Okay, whereas this is the broad-billed prion. They're very closely related. They're both prions. They're both Pachyptilla. This is Pachyptilla desolata, and this is Pachyptilla vittata. So they both belong to the same genus, but they're different because look how broad the bill of the broad-billed prion is. That bill is very fat, and a fat broad bill allows this bird to filter feed. Okay, so it can take a lot of water and squeeze the water out the sides of its bill and keep whatever fish and delicate, juicy, edible stuff in its mouth, but the water goes out. A bit like how a whale feeds, okay, through filter feeding. So the beaks of these two are quite different, and the beaks allow them to do different things. This one feeds mainly on fish, and this one feeds mainly on invertebrates. Because why? It is a filter feeder, whereas this one is not a filter feeder because it has a narrow beak. It cannot hold a lot of water, it cannot filter it out. Okay, so these two have very different ways of feeding. Okay, they have different adaptations. The beak is very adapted, but in a different way. Okay, this one has a very high fitness when it comes to eating these fish. It can eat fish better than this one. And this one has a very high fitness when it comes to eating invertebrates. It can eat invertebrates much better than this one. That's why they are different species. They have evolved these adaptations. But what happens when you have the Selvins prion? Selvins prion, look at the size of his bill. The Selvins prion's bill is not wide and it's not narrow. It's medium. It's between the two. Okay? And Selvins prion, its narrow bill, what do you think it allows it to eat? It allows it to eat all of these fish that this one can eat, plus it can eat all of the invertebrates that this one can eat because it can filter feed. It doesn't have a narrow bill, it doesn't have a wide bill, but its bill is wide enough it can filter feed, plus it can eat the fish. So it can eat many more species compared to either of the Antarctic prion or the broad-billed prion. And so we discovered that Selvins prion is a hybrid species. It's actually the Antarctic prion mated with the broad-billed prion, and the hybrid was this not a thin bill, not a wide bill, a medium bill. A medium bill species. And what did Ernst Mayr say when you have a hybrid between two species? He said the fitness of the hybrid will always go down. And that's why the hybrid can never make a species of its own. But he was wrong in this case. He was wrong in the case of the butterflies as well. He's been wrong in many cases now. And that is why we've dismantled his classical view of speciation. We now have this modern view. And this modern view says gene flow can create species. Okay? Ernst Mayr will be turning in his grave if he heard us say that, because he never believed it. But now with our modern days and our modern technology and genome sequencing, we have discovered that there is a role for gene flow in the speciation process. And especially when you have the situation of an adaptive radiation, where you have lots of different species evolving quickly, the reproductive isolation is not developed between them. Therefore, they are still able to mate. Even though they are looking different, they have different adaptations, like these two. But what? They still are able to mate with each other, because the reproductive isolation is incomplete. It is not developed. It takes a long time. Right? And so you get the situation where you have a hybrid with an intermediate bill, a medium bill, not a thin, not a narrow, and this, because it has a medium, it can feed on all of this stuff here that this guy can feed on, and it can feed on all of this stuff that that guy can feed on. So its fitness is higher than both of the parents. Okay? And that is why it has become a species of its own, because its fitness is higher than the fitness of its parent species. This is something that Ernst Mayr could never have predicted. Okay? What about another adaptive radiation? I've told you about the bovids. I've told you about the prions. But let's forget about them and concentrate on ourselves, like we love doing, being humans. Right? We love concentrating on ourselves. How many of your cell phones with a screensaver has a picture of yourself? Yeah? Most of you, right? We love ourselves, and we love talking about ourselves. So let's talk about ourselves. Let's talk about our own radiation, okay? Because we also didn't sprout out of the earth. We didn't come out of a hole, okay? We evolved. So, and how did we evolve? When the climate changed during this period of climatic upheaval during the Pleistocene, the grasslands, as I told you, it increased in size, okay? And what happened when the grasslands increased in size? The forests became smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And what animal lives in the forest? Our closest relatives, the apes, right? They don't live in grasslands. Yeah, they don't live on grasslands. They live in forests. Chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, all the apes live in forests. They need forests, big trees, fruits, and things like that. They can't live out in the grass, okay? They're not adapted to living in the grass. But when the climate changed, about 2.5 million years ago, suddenly you have got this expanse of grasslands. And what happened? The apes started coming down from the trees. And walking around. And this walking around of apes happened not 2 million years ago, it happened a long time ago. In fact, here in this picture here, that you see here, oh, sorry, my picture's in the way. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Let me move my picture. Here we go. Right, so this picture here, okay, this picture here that you see, this is a picture going back in time. This is the present day, and this is 8 million years ago. And you see that every line, every color here, every line with the color is a different species of hominid. And by what I mean by hominid, I mean apes that are no longer walking on all fours, knuckle walking. They are walking on twos, like you and me. Okay? And the first upright walking ape was one called Sahelanthropus chadensis. Why? Because he was discovered in Chad, in Africa. In fact, all of these guys are discovered in Africa. They are all our brothers and sisters. But Sahelanthropus, or to my boy, because the skeleton was a boy that was found, to my boy, and Ororin, as well as Ardipithecus ramidus, all of them had very small brains. Not like us. We have huge brains. Those still had chimp-sized brains. But they were walking on twos, perfectly like you and me do. Imagine that. An ape walking perfectly on two legs. Those were our ancestors. Okay? So, since that, you see, since the first ones evolved, here where my mouse is, that led to the radiation of many different species of upright walking ape, of which we are only one. And where are we? We are here. The Homo line is in red. Look how many species of Homo there are. We're not the only Homo. Okay? There are so many different species of Homo. Okay? And this one, Homo sapiens, there you see that? That is the only one where the red color goes until 0. Because 0 is when? Today. 0 is the present. 1 here is 1 million years ago. 2 is 2 million years ago, going back in time, right? So 0 here is today. And of all these, only this black line, which is the chimp, and our line, Homo sapiens, meets 0. All the others, some come close to 0, but none of them make it to the present. They all have gone extinct. Okay? And we only know that they exist. Why? Because of their fossils. And there have been hundreds, if not thousands of fossils picked up over the years in hundreds of different parts of the world. Okay? And in Africa, many of these fossils are hominid fossils. And they are. This is our actual family. We also belong to an adaptive radiation, the same as the prions, the same as the bovids, okay? Because when the climate changed, the grassland expanded, and as soon as we came onto the grass on two legs, it didn't take us long to evolve. Look how many species has evolved. And within a short space of time, bang, 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 evolution of many different closely related species. That is the adaptive radiation that led to us. Okay? We also are a product of an adaptive radiation, where you have lots of different species evolving in a very short space of time. And what happens when you have lots of species evolving in a short space of time? Yes, reproductive isolation does not keep up. It lags behind. So that means what? These new species, they are still able to breed with each other because there's no reproductive isolation. Because reproductive isolation takes long. Okay? So, that is the story. That is our own story. Okay? So, now, although only we are the only upright walking ape that is still in existence, we know, and this is not a story or a fairy tale or a fiction. Okay? This is a fact. It's time to remove nonsense from your world and concentrate on facts, because facts are the only thing that are going to make you succeed in life. Nonsense you don't need. Okay, leave it behind. Concentrate on facts, because facts is how you are going to succeed. You are going to get a good job. You are going to be a responsible person in society. Okay, facts, not fictions, not nonsense. Okay, so there were many species, and what happened, as I said, these early guys here, they were upright walking apes, but they had small brains. Okay, and as time progressed, the brain became bigger. In Australopithecus, Australopithecus means southern ape man. Okay, Australo is southern, ape is Pithecus is ape. Okay, also the brains are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you've got these guys here: Homo habilis, the handyman, and Homo rudolfensis from Lake Turkana. In where's Lake Turkana? Northern Kenya. Okay, southern Sudan, southern Ethiopia. All right, so you got these two guys suddenly appearing in the fossil record around 2.5 to 2 million years ago. These guys suddenly had a much bigger brain. They are taller. They look much more like us, much more like you and me. Okay, and then that led to the evolution of this guy here, Homo ergaster and Homo erectus, and then later on Homo heidelbergensis, from which begot Homo neanderthalensis and Homo denisova, the Denisova hominy. Okay, so these in red are the big-brained upright walking apes, the upright walking apes that belong to the genus Homo, man-like apes. In other words, us, our brothers and sisters. Okay, so with the increased brain size, some may say, well, why? Many have asked, why did the brain size increase in the genus Homo? Some have linked it to the fact that now we were able to travel bigger distances, we were able to hunt bigger prey and eat more meat. Whereas these guys here, Australopithecus and Kenyapithecus and so on, and Paranthropus, these guys here had big brains, but not as big as ours, but their teeth were grinding teeth. They had very big jaws, grinding teeth, and they were vegetarians, okay? Whereas this red here, this is us, Homo, and we started eating meat, fresh meat, and that is what some hypothesize is what helped increase our brain, okay? Because we have now more energy. We have more energy. And here, if you like, is is what those guys would have looked like. Okay? So this is basically, I would like to introduce you to your family. Okay? Meet the folks, ladies and gentlemen. These guys here are these guys here. Okay? This is our family. And where's us? Here's us here. That's our modern man. You, me, everyone. We are belonging to that species. But where is our Homo habilis? Here's Homo habilis. Did he look like us? Here he is here, Homo habilis. That's when he existed. Homo habilis. Here is Homo erectus. There's Homo erectus. Okay? The direct forefather of Neanderthal. Here is Paranthropus. This is Paranthropus boisia here. Here, who do you think this guy is? Yeah? This guy could be Heidelbergensis. He could be Neanderthalensis. This here is Neanderthalensis. Okay? This guy here is Neanderthal man. Okay? So all of these guys are extinct, except who? Us. We are the only one of these red guys here who are still alive. Our species is not just standing by itself. Didn't just pop out of the earth from nowhere. It evolved, we evolved as part of a massive adaptive radiation during the Pleistocene period in Africa. Okay? So, because we also evolved through this period of through an adaptive radiation, you guessed it, right? Reproductive isolation is even in our hominid species was not complete. So we were able to mate with each other. Ha! Ha! You are saying, Aish, how could we mate with a Neanderthal, Prof? Well, very easily. Very easily. We know that it happened. How do we know that it happened? How much hybridization occurred during our own adaptive radiation? Okay? Well, what we know is that modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa around 2 to 3 to 400,000 years ago. Then, when we left Africa about 60,000 years ago, we walked to Europe and to Asia. What do you think happened when our African people walked into Europe 40,000 years ago? Who do you think they found there? It was not an unpopulated place. It was already inhabited by another man-like upright walking ape. Another Homo, a man-like ape. And that was Homo neanderthalensis. Okay? So we came into secondary contact. Okay? We diverged from an ancestor, which was what? Homo ergaster. We diverged in Africa. Neanderthal man left Africa a million years ago. Started living in Europe. Much more recently, modern humans evolved in Africa and also left Africa. But when we arrived in Europe, we discovered that we were not alone in this world. Okay? We discovered, ooh, there's another kind of guy living here. A big guy. A big scary guy. And that was Neanderthal man. Okay? That was Neanderthal man. And this is the range in green here you see of the distribution of Neanderthal man. Let me just put that up there where it's not causing any overlap. Okay, this green is the distribution of, that's where he existed. So when we left Africa, and migrated out of Africa as modern humans, we encountered this guy in Europe 40,000 years ago. The question is, did us modern humans, did we exchange genes with Neanderthal when we came into contact with him in Europe? Or was the reproductive isolation already developed? In other words, there could not be any gene flow. What do you think? This is Denisova man from Asia. When we left Africa, we would have met him. This is Neanderthal man from Europe. So, what do you think our ancestors from Africa did? Did we mate with these guys? Or was it already that we were reproductively isolated? Well, until recently, such a question could never be answered. Okay? Because we didn't have any data from either of these species. All we had were the bones, the fossils. We didn't have any genes. We didn't have any proteins. We didn't have any other materials to compare. But then what happened? Ancient DNA and paleogenomics enters the scene. Ancient DNA suddenly means that there are new breakthroughs in recombinant DNA technology, such as PCR, NGS, and bioinformatics, which paved the way for the science of ancient DNA. So ancient DNA is obtained from fossilized bones or subfossilized bone. Okay? So we can take the Neanderthal fossil, and we don't have to just say, oh, look at this skull. It looks quite similar to humans, doesn't it? Maybe we were related. A lot of people can say yes, but maybe we were not. How do you know? This is how we know. We've taken DNA from those Neanderthal and Denisova fossils. And we sequenced the whole genome of them. And not just one, many of them. We now have whole genomes from long extinct species thanks to ancient DNA and the science of paleogenomics. And from that paleogenomic evidence, from the DNA of the genomes of Neanderthals that we have been able to sequence, we've lined it up with our own genome and we look to see where are the differences and where are the similarities. And what have we discovered? We have discovered that we have a common ancestor in Africa about 1 million years ago between modern humans and Neanderthal man. So we come from the same genetic stock. Then we meet in Europe, okay? And what do the genomes of Europeans and Asians show? The genomes of Europeans today, living today, like Prof. Ford and Prof. Barnhorn, those genomes, they have between 2% and 6% Neanderthal genes. Imagine. That is proving that those people who from Africa migrated and became European people and became Asian people, those people had gene flow with Neanderthal. And the integration came into our population. And what? We exchanged genes with Neanderthals. Okay? But if you look at the African people's genomes, there is no Neanderthal pieces in our African genomes. Why? Because our African people didn't go to Europe and we didn't meet Neanderthal there. Only the African people who went to Europe and became Europeans and became Asians, those were the guys who met those other species there and had a gene flow between them. Okay? And we mated with them and we hybridized with them. As this picture is insinuating. Here is Neanderthal man and here is a modern human woman. So when we mated with each other, when the modern humans leaving Africa mated with Neanderthal man, was the integration, we know that there was integration, gene flow, but was the integration adaptive? Did the gene flow give an advantage to those human populations that became hybrids? Did humans gain an advantage from mating with other species? Because remember, when those humans, we left Africa, we arrived in Europe, what color was the skin of those people? It was not white like it is today. It was black because we just left Africa. Okay? So, could it be that the white skin of Europeans and the blonde hair and red hair and the blue eyes and the green eyes and adaptations to high altitude, not in Europeans but in some certain Asian populations, have an adaptation to high altitudes like in Tibet, in the Himalayas? Could these adaptations, which give increased fitness, that's why they're adaptive, all of them are increasing the fitness of the bearers. Could these adaptations have come into our modern human beings from a long extinct different species of human? So you see, Ernst Mayer's view of classical speciation is now in tatters. Okay? It is finished. Because now we are showing that even we have been able to mate two species and gain an advantage. We didn't evolve this red hair in us. We were black when we arrived in Europe. But Neanderthal had a long time in Europe during the Ice Age. He was able to evolve these adaptations. So when we arrived there, we mated with him and we obtained those advantages from him without having to evolve it ourselves. So you see, adaptive introgression allows a species to take something, an advantage that another species has evolved, and make it its own. Now white skin and red hair and blonde hair is normal in Europe. And it's also normal in our whites here in Africa. It's a normal. To see a white person is normal, right? But remember, that phenotype of human is because of adaptive introgression with Neanderthal man and Denisova man. Don't forget it. Okay? So adaptive radiations. Okay? We see a lot of this hybridization and introgression during adaptive radiations. And that is because, and I keep telling you, it is because reproductive isolation takes a long time. Okay? So if introgression is happening, that means reproductive isolation has not happened, right? Because if reproductive isolation has happened, the introgression, gene flow, will be retarded. It won't happen because the fitness of those hybrids will be low. Okay? But the rapid evolution of many different phenotypes or species can happen during adaptive radiation before reproductive isolation gets a chance to complete itself. And during that time, there's chance to do gene flow between the species. Okay? Therefore, you see so much adaptive introgression during adaptive radiations, such as our hominid adaptive radiation. Okay? So it could be, and this is one of my personal theories, is that if a rapidly evolving species, especially if evolving in isolation, what is going to happen to that population? Genetic drift is going to hammer that population. That population is going to lose genetic diversity. And in the next couple of lectures, in the next molecular ecology section, you're going to see that losing genetic diversity is not a good thing. It's a very bad thing. Okay? It decreases the population's fitness. So what happens then when we are losing genetic variation but evolving rapidly? It might be a good idea to mate with another species and get the variation that it has got into your gene pool to increase the variation of your gene pool, which is going down. So it could be that the lag in reproductive isolation, so the fact that reproductive isolation takes so long to develop, is actually because it wants to give these species a chance to get gene flow and genetic diversity from other species. And it could be that this gene flow actually facilitates the adaptive radiation. So it makes the adaptive radiation possible. So you see the potential use, the potential role for gene flow in the speciation process is massive, thanks to our modern view of looking at things. Okay? These ideas that I'm telling you about in these last two lectures, they were foreign to Ernst Mayr and Theodosius Dobzhansky. Even though those guys were much cleverer than me or you, they still did not know what we know today. And that is the beauty of science. Okay? And I will continue the last lecture on speciation, lecture 35, next time round. And in that lecture, we're going to be talking about how we model speciation using our newly developed coalescent framework.